Thurdays spoilers night at Fairmont Crest was never really about the quiet glow of porch lights or the soft hum of sprinklers across manicured lawns. It was about what people chose to do when they thought no one was really watching. On the surface, Beyond the Gates promised a simple dose of romance and family drama, but underneath the polished veneer of the Dupree world, every choice was a trade, every favor carried a debt, and every secret had a price. Ashley Morgan understood that more clearly than most. On Monday, she had made a decision that felt harmless in the moment but dangerous the longer she thought about it. She had gone around the normal protocols at the lab to rush the genetic marker tests for Naomi Hawthorne and Chelsea Hamilton, leaning on a connection she knew she could charm. It started as something she told herself was noble, or at least necessary. People were waiting for answers. There were questions about hereditary risk, about what the genes might reveal for the women tied to the Dupree orbit, and Ashley hated the idea of letting bureaucracy decide how long they would remain in limbo. But underneath that rationalization was the very human truth that she enjoyed having power, even if it was a quiet, hidden kind of power. The favor came in the form of a lab technician named Grayson Perez, someone she had noticed more than once in the fluorescent wash of the hospital corridors. Grayson had that combination of easy laugh and focused eyes that made him stand out. He knew his work, he took pride in his results, and he had never been one to casually bend the rules. When he agreed to help Ashley by moving Naomi and Chelsea's samples to the top of the queue, he did not pretend it was purely professional. There was a condition attached, and he made it clear without a shred of shame he wanted a date. For many people, that might have felt transactional in a way that would send them running. For Ashley, it felt like a line she could see clearly and still choose to cross. She thought he was incredibly cute, and that physical attraction dulled the ethical alarm bells just enough for her to say yes. She told herself it was harmless because she genuinely wanted to get to know him, because there was genuine chemistry there that had nothing to do with test tubes and data. But the truth was that she was mixing her heart with her work in a way that could come back to haunt her, especially in a town where nothing stayed hidden for long. The weekly teaser showing Ashley and Grayson flirting at the bar only confirmed what the Monday episode had begun to set up. Under the low lights, away from the sterile lab surfaces, Grayson looked different. He wasn't just the technician behind the glass anymore. He was a man figuring out how to disarm someone who guarded herself with competence and quick wit. Ashley, dressed in a way that felt more like herself and less like the version of her that walked hospital corridors, allowed her guard to drop in small, risky increments. Their conversation moved from light teasing to real vulnerability as the drinks flowed and the bar faded into the background. She could feel his admiration when he listened to her talk about why she cared so much about getting faster answers for families like Naomi and Chelsea. About how long she had watched people age under the weight for test results, aging not in years, but in worrying. He saw her not just as the woman who had asked for a favor, but as someone who carried responsibility on her shoulders, and that recognition fed something lonely inside her. In turn, Ashley saw in Grayson more than just a good-looking shortcut in the lab. She saw a man who had chosen science as a way to feel in control of something in a world that made very little sense. A man whose sense of humor covered up how seriously he took his oath to do things by the book. That made his decision to prioritize her tests feel both flattering and unsettling. If he was willing to bend for her, what else might he bend for? Yet, in the moment, the moral quandary softened under the warmth between them. The teasing touches on the arm, the shared glances, the feeling of being seen turned the bar into a private universe. The tease in the preview that they might end up in bed was more than just a stunt for ratings. It was the natural extension of two people who had both been carrying quiet pressure and found an outlet in each other. If they did cross that final line, it would stitch their personal and professional lives together in a way that would be impossible to untangle once the test results came back. Because the consequences of those results would not just belong to Naomi and Chelsea. They would shape the story of whether Ashley had made a compromise that would later look like manipulation. If someone like Vernon, or worse, Anita, ever learned that a romantic connection influenced the pace of life-changing results, Ashley would go from dedicated advocate to a woman accused of playing God with a smile. Still, on that Tuesday night, the series wanted viewers to lean into the romance, to enjoy the heat between Ashley and Grayson, even as the shadow of test results lengthened behind them. It framed their flirtation as a bright, intoxicating escape, all while quietly setting up a future where both of them would have to answer for the choices they made under dim bar lights. Across town, under a very different kind of lighting, another secret was taking shape. This time under the Dupree roof that had seen more whispered confessions and bruised prayers than anyone on the outside would ever suspect. Vernon Dupree had always seen himself as the quiet anchor of the family, the one who held the line when emotions ran to high, the one who believed in managing information as carefully as he managed investments. He told himself that control was a form of love, that the lesson Nita knew while she was enduring chemotherapy. The safer she would be from the additional stress that could scrape away what remained of her strength. When the genetic marker test for Donnie Dupree came back positive, Vernon read the report alone, standing in his home office with the door closed. The simple black text on white paper looking more like a verdict than a medical fact. It was a marker, not a guarantee, a risk, not a sentence. But he thought about Anita, her body, already waging war against one enemy, and he simply could not bring himself to place a new fear on her shoulders. His instinct was immediate. He would hide it, at least for now. He would protect her from it the way he wished someone had protected her from every hurt that had ever come crashing through their front door. He convinced himself that he just needed time, that he would tell her when she was stronger, when the worst of the chemotherapy had passed. And so he moved the report into a folder, the folder into a drawer, the drawer into a mental vault he promised himself he would revisit. In a different story, that might have worked. But in the world of Beyond the Gates, secrets never stay buried, and the very act of hiding the truth almost guarantees it will be discovered in the most painful way possible. Anita's return from chemotherapy was not triumphant, but it was defiant. The treatment had left its mark on her, in the tiredness that clung to her limbs, in the way her reflection looked like a softened sketch of the woman she had been, but her mind remained sharp. She had not survived this long in the Dupree family by letting things slip past her unnoticed. When she walked back into the house, she noticed the small changes that everyone else assumed she was too exhausted to see, papers that weren't where she left them, conversations that stopped a little too quickly when she entered the room, the way Vernon's eyes slid away from hers in certain moments. She understood fear. She was living with her own every day. But she also understood the texture of deceit, especially when it came from the man who had built a life next to hers on a foundation of mutual trust. At first, the dissonance manifested as unease. She told herself that Vernon was simply tired, that he was carrying the weight of watching her suffer. She excused the stiffness in his embrace, the way he seemed to be listening for something that was not her voice. But then she began to notice how often Donnie's name came up quickly, only to vanish, how conversations about the future trailed off into silence, how the younger woman's smile never fully reached her eyes when the subject of health or destiny arose. Eventually, patterns formed a picture, and Anita, with the clarity that comes from knowing you may not have endless time, decided that she would not live in the dark. When she found the evidence, whether it was a misfiled report, a carelessly placed envelope, or a piece of information overheard at precisely the wrong moment, impact was less like a sudden explosion and more like the heartbreaking confirmation of a dread she had already begun to sense. Donnie had tested positive for a genetic marker, and Vernon had known. He had known, and he had chosen to hide it. The show positioned that discovery not as a melodramatic outburst, but as a quiet shattering. Anita's anger, when it surfaced, came wrapped in hurt. She saw his supposed protection for what it really was, a decision made about her life and her child's future without her voice in the room. The woman who had endured chemotherapy without surrender suddenly realized that the most dangerous thing in her life might not be the disease attacking her cells, but the man who believed he had the right to cure it her reality. For Vernon, the moment of exposure stripped away all of his rationalizations. His insistence that he had been trying to shield her rang hollow in the face of a wife who had stood at his side through every storm and now watched him as if he were just another threat to manage. He had taken it upon himself to calibrate when and how she could handle fear, not because she was too weak, but because he could not bear watching her carry one more burden. His love had twisted into control without him noticing. The writers used that fracture to do more than just create another Dupree argument. They used it to question what real partnership looks like when illness and genetics complicate every choice. Anita's return and her discovery of Donnie's test results turned the domestic sphere into a battlefield where trust and transparency became the only real weapons. And it cast a new light on every future conversation the couple would have about treatment, about the children, about legacy. Both Storolina's intoxicating spark between Ashley and Grayson and the devastating secret between Vernon and Anatole were framed against the same invisible backdrop, genes, markers, and the terrifying knowledge that some parts of our fate are written before we know how to read them. Ashley sought control by pushing tests through faster, using charm to bend the process. Vernon sought control by slowing information down, smothering it under layers of good intentions. In their own ways, they both tried to manage truth rather than simply face it. Tuesday's episode promised to be dramatic not because of big explosions or public scandals, but because it showed what happens when private choices start to collide with the unavoidable force of reality. As Ashley lay tangled in new feelings with a man who now held more than just her professional trust, she was walking into a future where every result that came out of that lab would carry the echo of their date. As Anita stared at the husband who had decided she could not handle the truth about her own child, the Dupree home became a question mark rather than a refuge. And somewhere in between, Naomi and Chelsea's pending results floated like storm clouds on the horizon, a reminder that no matter how high the gates are built around Fairmont Crest, the people inside cannot fence out the consequences of the secrets they keep.